Hi everyone, you're watching the virtual Amicus and I'm Jay Lodha. So today's topic is really very interesting. Today's topic would be on think tanks and in particular, we'll be discussing about Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. And just to give you all a brief introduction about our topic, think tank or a policy institute is basically a research institute that performs research and advocacy concerning topics such as social policy, political strategy, economics, etc. But today we'll be talking about the role of Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, which is an independent think tank which does legal research to make better laws and improve governance for the public good. Now, joining us today is a very special speaker. We are joined by Miss Dhvani Mehta. And just to give you all a brief introduction about her Amicus for today's session, she is a co-founder at Vidhi and lead in health. She has worked specifically on research projects on environmental clearances, the National Green Tribunal, organ transplant laws, and end-of-life care, and pharmaceutical and medical device regulation. She has appeared in the Honorable Supreme Court of India and petitions filed by Vidhi on advanced medical directives and discrimination against persons affected by leprosy. She has read for a doctoral degree at the University of Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship. That's right. So for the first time, we have with us on the virtual Amicus a Rhodes Scholar, where she was chairperson of Oxford Pro Bono Publico and an editor of the Oxford Human Rights. And just to talk about the Rhodes Scholarship, well, it is an international postgraduate award for students to study at the University of Oxford, and it is by far regarded as the oldest graduate scholarship in the world and definitely one of the most prestigious international scholarships. So thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out time. It will be in a Q&A format. And anything that you wish to say before we start with our segment?
No, thank you very much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you for the kind introduction.
Fantastic. So, ma'am, question number one, what exactly are think tanks? And is Vidhi the only thing that, as far as law is concerned in our country?
So think tanks, as the name suggests, are organizations that are interested in being thought leaders. So they are independent institutes that shape the public narrative on issues of importance to society, to the economy, to humanity in general. In some sense, they're not very different from academic institutes or universities, in that just as in a university you can have a research center that produces papers and books and articles on a range of issues. That's somewhat similar to what a think tank does. But I think the perception is that think tanks are seen as being more involved in the public and political life of a country, in that their fellows at think tanks are more are more visible in the public eye. They write in national newspapers, they speak at conferences, they interact a lot with other stakeholders, especially those in government. So there's a lot of exchange that goes on between a think tank and the national legislative and political institutions of a country. Now, as far as Vidhi being, I would say that Vidhi doesn't perhaps fit the traditional mold of a think tank, because it doesn't just produce original research. It also helps translate that research into law and policy reform. So we work actively with the union government as well as various state governments to help draft legislation. And I think that's what distinguishes us from other think tanks. But of course, I wouldn't say we're the only think tank of that kind. There are other institutions that also perform similar kinds of roles. But yes, certainly one of our stated missions is to be able to work with government to make better laws. And we do that by engaging primarily with the executive arm of government.
Great, ma'am. So coming to our next question, ma'am. So do you engage with state governments and then work on draft legislations? Or do you also work with private companies and assist them?
We don't work with any private companies at all. So we only work with public institutions. So it could be the union government, and within the union government, it could be a variety of different ministries. It could be with different departments in the state government. It could be with the Supreme Court, with the National Judicial Academy, with other kinds of public institutions like the Niti Aayog. But we don't work with private parties in the sense that we don't take on projects that are commissioned by private parties. Of course, we interact with private parties and hold joint events with, and by private parties I mean anyone that is a non-government actor. So it could be a corporation or it could be a civil society organization. So we collaborate a lot with other stakeholders in the space, but we don't take on commissioned projects from non-government parties.
Great, ma'am. And as far as, ma'am, your role is concerned at Vidhi, what exactly is your nature of job at Vidhi? Are you specializing in any particular kind of matters?
Sure. So my area of specialization is environmental law, because that's what I did my doctoral degree in. And my initial years at Vidhi, I spent a fair bit of time doing original research on environmental law. So identifying some of the legal and governance gaps in environmental law and suggesting reforms that were needed. Now I work primarily on matters of health law, so that could range from issues like access to health, pharmaceutical regulation, end-of-life care, grievance redressal mechanisms at public health establishments. These are some of the different research areas that I have worked on. And the nature of my work is primarily to do original research. So again, as I said, to identify areas where I think there is a gap in the law, find out what needs to be done to plug that gap and make recommendations to the appropriate authorities. And then if that translates into actual engagement with a government body or any other public actor, then we are happy as a team to take that on as well.
So I'm moving forward now to our next question. Does Vidhi Center for Policy Research offer internship opportunities or articleship experiences for law students who are looking at a career in public policy or research?
Yes, absolutely. We are very actually grateful to all the law students and sometimes non-law students who intern with us. So we do have an internship program. We typically offer internships for a period of 4 weeks. Over the last couple of years, we've obviously been working remotely. So even interns have been working remotely, but we hope to be able to resume physical working sometime soon. Anyone who's interested in applying for an internship can look at the internship section on the Vidhi website, and there will be an application form, and please do write into us.
Fantastic, ma'am. And now this question, it was, I was bombarded with this question by at least 25 viewers. And I'm too tempted to ask this one. How does it feel to be a Rhodes Scholar, ma'am? Because this has to be the world's most prestigious scholarship program.
I am very grateful for the opportunity that I received to go to the University of Oxford and pursue a fantastic legal education there. And so, yes, I feel immensely grateful to be one, and I'm acutely aware that it's my responsibility to give back some of what I've received. So I suppose I'm grateful and humbled, very aware of what my obligations are as someone who's had the privilege of receiving this opportunity and invitation.
Well, thank you, ma'am, there. And as far as a career at Vidhi or a similar type of a think tank is concerned, ma'am, how important is a master's program? Do you think there is a prerequisite requirement for a law student or a freshly graduate lawyer to have an area of specialization to be able to be eligible to apply to a prestigious legal think tank like Vidhi?
No, it's not a prerequisite at all. In fact, we have a lot of people who just graduated from law school who joined Vidhi. And so, in fact, quite a bulk of the organization is made up of people who have recently passed out of law, have recently graduated law school. So it obviously depends on the level at which you apply. So if you're applying for a more senior position, of course, it would be great if you have work experience. Again, a master's is not a prerequisite. If you have one, well and good. What we do is that we try and encourage people who have spent some time at Vidhi to apply for a master's, go abroad and come back and rejoin us, because we believe that you are able to get more out of a master's degree after you have worked for a few years and identified your area of interest and specialization. So that's typically my advice to all persons interested in pursuing a degree abroad. So wait for a little bit, find out what it is that really interests you, and then you will get much more value out of your master's degree if you go abroad after that.
So to all the viewers who are watching, master's program is simply not just an extension of your 5 years course. So give it some time, identify what you're really passionate about, and subsequently pursue it. Then only it'll add value to you, to your profile. So ma'am, any landmark legislation that Vidhi has been part of, or any such experience that you wish to share wherein you've assisted Honorable Supreme Court of India or various other high courts?
Yeah, so I personally, I don't do as much legislative drafting work with government. So I'll be happy to speak about an experience with a petition that Vidhi had filed in the Supreme Court. This was to challenge the constitutionality of 119 provisions across central and state government laws that discriminated against persons affected by leprosy. So we discovered that there were provisions like this through the course of an engagement with the Law Commission of India, which was doing a report on leprosy. From this engagement, we continued our association with an organization called the Leprosy Mission Trust of India, which does a lot of fantastic work for persons affected by leprosy. And they alerted us to this issue of discriminatory legal provisions. And then we decided to find out what the true extent of the problem was. And that's when our research uncovered that there were as many as 119 and possibly more discriminatory legal provisions on the statute books. And we thought that this was a ripe case for strategic public interest litigation, which is why we decided to file a petition in the Supreme Court on the grounds that these provisions violated the right to equality and dignity of persons affected by leprosy. So just to give you an example, there were provisions that prohibited such persons from holding an administrative position in a university, or that said that persons affected by leprosy couldn't use public transport or couldn't access a public library. And a lot of these provisions are a legacy of colonial legislation in India, but a lot of them have also been enacted in post-independence India, simply because we haven't applied our minds to this question at all. So the petition was well received in the Supreme Court, and the court directed state governments to consider repealing some of these offending provisions. And currently, more than 20 of those provisions have already been repealed. So it's a very slow process, but we are hopeful that things will keep moving, and we'll soon, have a time when no provision like this exists on the statute books.
Great, ma'am. Now, moving forward, ma'am, if you could give a brief history about how Vidhi came into being, because this is one think tank in the field of law, which is unique, and it has done exceedingly well over the years. So if you could share your journey, because you were the co-founder.
Sure, I was the co-founder, but I think more credit goes to the founder and the other three co-founders who actually began Vidhi in Delhi in December 2013. The idea for Vidhi came from some research work that my other co-founders did while they were students at Oxford and at Harvard and some, other foreign universities, when they submitted comments to a parliamentary standing committee on the draft nuclear liability bill. And then they discovered that those comments were well received, and they were invited to make representations before the standing committee, and ultimately saw that some of their suggestions were actually accepted into the final form of the law that was passed. So this was quite encouraging for law students to see that some of their research could translate into actual law. And that's when, they identified that perhaps there's a gap that exists in India where governments need more assistance, more high quality research in helping them conceptualize and draft legislation. And that's when we decided that maybe there was room for us to create an organization that did that. And that's the genesis of Vidhi.
And ma'am, how important does academics play a role in a 5-year or a 3-year curriculum? Because that is unfortunately the most neglected. That is something that always takes the back seat.
What do you mean by academics taking the back
Academia,
seat?
as in someone who wishes to pursue a career or a master's program abroad, and then we.
Yeah.
So, how important does academics play as far as the role is concerned? In your
So
case,
by
how?
this, no, I'm sorry, I'm not entirely sure if I've understood the question. I mean, are you saying that there is not enough emphasis in
Not
law
in.
schools on conducting academic research?
I think it's both ways, ma'am. Both at the college level as well as students putting in a lot of effort on academics as far as academics is concerned.
Right. I mean, law school can, I think there are many problems with legal education in India, and one of those is not encouraging original independent thought and research. So in that sense, yes, I'd say that there isn't enough of an emphasis on good academic rigor and high quality independent thinking. And for that, our legal curriculum needs to change quite fundamentally, and our way of approaching examinations and of thinking about the law also really needs to change quite drastically. I mean, this is a much longer battle, and I don't know if I'm well equipped to talk about that. But yes, certainly, when I went abroad and sort of saw how the law could be taught, it opened up a new world to me, and I felt like I hadn't been used to thinking in that way during my law school years in India.
Great, ma'am. And lastly, what would be your advice to all the young lawyers and law students who are watching this? For someone who wishes to have or pursue a career at a policy tank or a think tank, what would be your advice to them?
My advice to them would be to interact with a lot more non-lawyers. So I think that lawyers tend to be quite insular. They tend to, not have as wide a worldview as is desirable and is necessary if you are working in a policy think tank. If you are interested in large scale legal and policy changes, it's so much more important to be it's more important to be more than just a good lawyer. There's so much more that you need to know of and be aware of and have an opinion on. So my advice would be to sort of challenge yourselves, push yourselves out of your comfort zone, interact with disciplines other than the law, because really sometimes, I mean, lawmaking and law drafting is really not about the commas and the ors and the ands. It's about actually understanding the social and political and economic context in which the law operates. So my advice would be to, definitely have an interdisciplinary perspective on things.
Well, thank you so much there, ma'am, for taking our time for doing this really very important session on the role of Vidhi and think tanks. So to all the viewers who are watching, our email is mentioned on the channel. In case of any queries, feel free to write to us. We'll be more than happy to forward the same to our Amicus for today's session. So thank you so much, ma'am. Your presence really means a lot to me and my entire team on the virtual Amicus. Any parting words that you wish to say? Anything that you wish to say before we wrap this up?
No, thank you very much, Jay, for having me on your channel. It's been a real pleasure. And yeah, to anyone out there who wants any advice on, generally on doing master's degrees or working at a policy think tank, I'm more than happy to have a chat. So feel free to get in touch with me through Jay if you need to.
Thank you so much there, ma'am. So stay tuned. Next episode is on its way. A big thank you to ma'am once again. It's goodbye for now. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.